Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 9 team selection. I'm recording this video right now after the Champions League games have played, so obviously there's still actually some European football, including some Conference League football, right, which Palace is going to be playing a part of, and that's not really going to impact my team in the short term for Game Week 9, but I have already made my moves early this week, at least 2 out of 3 of them. One of them is still pending, and I'm hopeful that the moves that I want to make this week can be made, right, and that I don't really need to force other moves in the future. I think when I look at my team and review Game Week 8, I had a really good Game Week. I had 82 points. That sent me to 231,000 in the world. I think the only problem points within my team would be Reinders, of course, when you look at that. And more so really from the perspective of City's next few fixtures aren't great and his minutes aren't great. I think there's now a possibility for him to be benched within the Premier League. I think it might not happen, for example, for this game week, but I think that's a real possibility. As far as, let's say, some of the other picks in my team, it's always nice to have Mateta and Bruno perform well in relatively, I think, tougher games as well, to be honest. Like I think a lot of people, like myself, I rated Bournemouth defense really highly. And so for Mateta to have the kind of quality of the game that he had was extremely surprising. And even though he had really good numbers before that game, I mean, that's completely blown open the picture in terms of how I feel about Mateta. As far as Bruno, he was actually someone that I was quite adamant to keep because I knew he was going to get a price drop. But I mean, with the fixture run ahead, him actually getting a haul versus Liverpool, I think is just fantastic. With Virgil, he looks like a problem point, but I think he just has way too many good fixtures, and I'm, a little bit optimistic about that sort of Frankfurt performance. Not because he scored a goal, but just because overall Liverpool looked quite a ways better, and maybe we'll see that sort of new structure in place sometime soon. They did still concede a goal, of course, in that game, but I don't think the quality of chances that Frankfurt, for example, got was actually that good. And actually, when you look at Frankfurt and contextualize it in the Bundesliga, they're actually one of the better offenses. So quite a good performance from Liverpool, to be honest. But we've also seen this sort of herky-jerky before with, let's say, the really good performance versus Atletico Madrid. And then, of course, the league performances haven't really matched up or lived to that. Ryan Gabriel, the interesting piece, I suppose, here is just, how we think about triple Arsenal and that sort of continuous discussion. I mean, I've already made my transfers, so you guys will probably kind of have an idea of where we're going to go with Lacroix. I think he's a soft problem. I mean, he just feels a touch overpriced when you look at how Richards exists, but I don't think he independently is overpriced, if that makes sense. It just is the reality that Richards is there and is 0.5 cheaper, and it's definitely someone that I can move to if I really want to just sort of make a passive upgrade to my team where I get 0.5 back into the squad. And Paqueta with a West Ham team, I think probably a soft problem as well, just didn't look great. Anderson, the injury, I don't think is something that really hurts my team structure because I actually have really, really good defenders. But of course, the one missing defender that is amazing is Munoz, and I don't have him in my team. But beyond that, I think I'm really happy, generally speaking, with my team, and I think that has allowed me to think that I can make some potentially luxury moves this week, and we'll talk about that right now. As far as what moves that you want to make for this weekend, I would recommend having a look at the link in the description below. Fantasy Football Hub have a 50% offer on their pro subscription right now. So if you want to actually have a look at plugging your team in, getting a suggested transfer, not only just, for example, the top line suggested transfer, but also alternative suggested transfers based on your transfer pass, based on your sort of chip strategy, feel free to have a look at that as well. There's definitely a lot of other tools that you can use, like the OptaStats tool, which we frequently use for the cheat sheets, and also sort of populating the DEFCON data that we use every single week. So as far as this week, I think in Game Week 9, I don't think there's a big sort of fixture shift, but I do think that when you look at the fixtures this week, it's quite interesting to see that it's a week where it's a nice time to probably reinvest into some of the teams that were already quite high on. And I think what I mean by this is still like a really, really good Liverpool game. So actually not a bad opportunity to think about going to Liverpool. Chelsea, of course, have amazing odds for this match, so they're definitely a team to look at. I would say Arsenal, the thing is most people are already tripled up on Arsenal, but if you still haven't done so, I mean, this is still a home game for them, and they've just been so good on defense. And finally, I think unveiled a little bit more in offense within the previous match versus Atletico Madrid in the Champions League. And that's going to give a lot of people confidence, right? Because, of course, of the recurring sort of matchups for Crystal Palace and how many goals they've scored in recent games versus them. Otherwise, we have some pretty one-sided matchups in terms of Bournemouth versus Nottingham Forest, but a lot of us are invested in Semenyo. This week, I think one of the hot topics in terms of discussions, when you look at, for example, some of the odds is, I mean, Chelsea and Bournemouth having such high expected goals. I mean, this is a pretty good look for if you want to move into a Krupi Jr. or if you want to move into potentially a Mark Yu, who looks like he's set to start in this match. But I think the key thing with Krupi is he doesn't really have that many threats now that Evan Nilsson is potentially out for this game. Whereas with the Chelsea picture, you still have players like Tyreek George, and of course the potential setup of just simply playing João Pedro up top once again, that it's available towards Enzo Maresca. And of course, I think that really sort of tapers down the ceiling in terms of used minutes. And Krupi Jr. was actually substituted in the previous match for when he was actually playing versus Crystal Palace. But I think part of that is a little bit of game states. And second of all, of course, I mean, he's a little bit younger. And I think in terms of his utility as a player, I think Irola has talked about how he needs to improve in certain actions compared to, let's say, what Evan Nilsson brings to the table outside of the pure goal scoring aspect of things in terms of pressing, etc. One thing I wanted to mention this week is when we kind of look at some of the fixtures from some of the sort of weaker teams, you know, Wolves versus Burnley is there as a great game, but I think it's really hard to sort of justify moving into Wolves right now because they're also looking really, really poor. Although, of course, there's like maybe an Ariasen or a Strand Larson there who could still be of interest to certain players, but then the run actually gets a little bit worse now that they've actually played a lot of the on-paper weaker teams that they have within their calendar. United versus Brighton's an interesting game because I think these are both teams that we regard quite a bit more this season, but United are at home, and I think this is actually going to be quite a good game for United, so I'm looking forward to that. With Everton versus Spurs, that seems to be quite a one-sided game, and I think as someone who's watched Spurs more often than I'd like to this season, I just don't think that they've been a very good team so far, neither on offense or even defense. I think watching the Monaco game, I was quite shocked to actually see that they were able to keep a clean sheet. And I think Everton at home actually looks like a really, really tasty sort of matchup where I would think Everton are quite favourite to win. But actually the odds don't really suggest that, so something to think about. Leeds versus West Ham, I think we just saw West Ham play as well at home. They might play better away, just given sort of fan sentiment right now and things like that. But I think this is one of Leeds' best games. And potentially just in terms of like how teams have actually performed so far this season, West Ham might truly be the worst team so far alongside a Forest, right? But even when you look at Forest and maybe even like evaluate last weekend versus Chelsea, I think the key thing to talk about is they actually looked like a really competent team too. So I think with Sean Dyche coming in, you're probably going to expect that Nottingham Forest are actually going to be quite a formidable team in a few weeks' time. Whereas I can't really say the same with West Ham, or maybe this is just, you know, Nuno with his tricks. I don't really know what the lineup was versus Brentford, but you know, that did happen. So yeah, I think this week is an interesting sort of fixture window where, okay, this is the last City game, I would say, to potentially own a City player that's not Haaland. And then you can consider selling after this. As far as, let's say, Arsenal and Liverpool, I think it's still worth investing into these teams, maybe even Bournemouth and Chelsea as well. Outside of that, I don't think there's too many interesting games that I would focus on. Maybe Man United versus Brighton as well, because we know Man United are about to step into a pretty good run. So if you sort of recently, I guess, moved off of some United players, there's actually some potential to move into them. At the same time, I think one player that I will pick out that I really, really love, even though I don't think the fixture is particularly good because it is Fulham, is going to be Waltemad. I think Waltemad is one of my favorite picks this week when it comes to buying a player and sort of looking at him. So let's just strictly jump into my team selection for Gameweek 9 after having a look at some of these match week odds. As far as, you know, my team, I'm going to line up with a 3-5-2 this weekend. And part of this is because I've changed my team into a 3-5-2/4-4-2 structure. So I'm going to go with Raya, Virgil, Gabriel, and Senesi. So still a lot of money within defense. I think the nice thing with Virgil is that, one, he's either a cash cow, or two, someone that I actually keep for the run of games that Liverpool have actually post Game Week 12. So when you look at someone like Virgil van Dijk, sure, he's got a bad game versus Man City in Game Week 11, but actually after that, you basically encounter a great run of games, which is going to be Nottingham Forest at home, West Ham away, Sunderland at home, Leeds away. So whilst I think, sure, there's other players in the game who are a little bit cheaper, who have vastly outscored Van Dijk so far, I don't think necessarily that he's going to be a sell for me. I'm sure some people disagree, and that's fine. I just think because he's actually elevated his sort of level with DEFCON and he still has that set piece threat, I think he's actually a really well positioned player to own for me for at least, you know, the next maybe 7 game week. As far as, let's say, Gabriel and Raya, the big topic there is just going to be whether I ever consider making a move away from my goalkeeper into Urian Timber. For now, I don't think that's necessary, but maybe I'll sort of reevaluate with, let's say, what happens with Anderson going forwards, and if I ever have more money, I guess, to put into the team. I suppose also when I look at someone like Virgil van Dijk, the classic replacement for like is going to be someone at Timber's price point. So maybe if I want to take the money away from the goalkeepers, that's something I could do in the future. But I still think I don't really mind Raya at all. He's going to be just a slow burn, and I think someone that I'm quite comfortable with. As far as Senesi, this is one of the best games that Bournemouth will have up until at least, I think, Game Week 10 or 11 rather. So the next 2 games after this aren't particularly good because it's going to be, you know, City away, Aston Villa away. But after that, I mean, Bournemouth just have another extremely electric run. So there's an opportunity, I think, for people to actually go triple Bournemouth at some point in time. But I think the tricky thing that we've sort of dealt with so far is, who is that third Bournemouth pick? Is it someone like Clivert who's actually getting more minutes, or is it someone like maybe Krupi Jr. if, let's say, Evan Nilsson's out, or even maybe just going into Evan Nilsson because he could be back in a few weeks' time and just be an absolutely electric pick. So something to think about. Or you can just go with Diakite, right? If you're quite confident in the defense, Petrovic is also available to you as a transfer in a few weeks' time. That means I'm going to put Anderson on the bench. That also means I'm going to put Lacroix on the bench. I mean, that's purely fixture related. I think Newcastle away is a pretty bad game for Anderson. Same with Lacroix. Sure, they can get DEFCON, as we've seen. Players who've played versus Newcastle, players who've played versus Arsenal so far have gotten some quite good DEFCON games. But that just feels like, good auto sub territory, maybe a maximum of 3 points, considering that they're quite likely to, get a yellow card, maybe even concede 2 goals plus. In the midfield, shifting over to that, I'm going to be playing Semenyo, Saka, Bruno, Paqueta, and Dewsbury Hall, but Paqueta will be Enzo, right? So unless there's bad news on Enzo, but he just played 45 minutes versus Ajax, and I think he was purely subbed off because he just needed to get some minutes in his legs. And of course, he was coming back from an international break where he came home a little bit early, probably due to some sort of right knee issues. I can't exactly remember the condition, but of course, it sort of precluded him from being able to play in the previous match versus Nottingham Forest. I think he's set to play some good minutes in this weekend. But if Enzo Maresca gives any sort of indication that, let's say, Enzo is not ready to play, I think I will keep Paqueta in my team and then actually roll the transfer. So that's just something I wanted to mention in terms of my team selection, right? So I plan on going Enzo from Paqueta to Enzo, but for now, I will just have Paqueta in my team and make that transfer a little bit later. Potentially even on the deadline stream, I'll make that transfer. Bruno is about to embark on a crazy good run of games. So we're talking about Brighton at home, Nottingham Forest away, Tottenham away, which is pretty poor. But then the rest of the games after that are generally quite good, right? And I think in terms of, if you think about Bruno as maybe, let's say, a long-term hold now, I mean, I can see myself honestly owning Bruno up until something like Gameweek 22 when he has City and Arsenal and Fulham 3 games in a row that are pretty poor. There are some games here where I think, the away matches make it a little bit tougher, but I think when you actually think about Bruno as a player, to me, he's kind of fixture proof. Like, I don't think he's the best player in the game. I'm not saying that. I just think that if I'm willing to spend enough money on a certain player, I think Bruno does give you that sort of value. And we always sort of overreact week on week in terms of like the missed penalties so far. Amarim's confirmed him to be the penalty taker. So I don't really have a fear about his future potential in terms of getting points, unless he really is going to miss 3 penalties within a season, which would be quite shocking, right, considering his record. As far as Saka, I've moved into Saka, right? So I've used one of my free transfers this week, and it is a total luxury move. I think you look at Gyökeres within the Champions League match and he's able to score. I didn't buy Gyökeres because I thought he was incapable of scoring, and I'm not selling Gyökeres because I think he's incapable of scoring. I just think that from a luxury move point of view, Havertz coming back and Madueke coming back is going to hurt both Saka and Gyökeres, but I think the person who's going to get hurt more ultimately is going to be Gyökeres. So knowing that actually Saka is going to get a price rise, knowing that Gyökeres was going to get a price fall probably once again in the future, and then also take into consideration that Reinders was going to get a price drop, I thought it actually made sense to go for the aggressive move based on my transfer plans to move into Saka this week. So whilst I think they're actually equivalent picks, and I'll sort of jump into that discussion in a moment, I just think that structurally speaking, I really like going to Saka now, because not only is he a placeholder for potentially downgrading to someone else, like for example, come game week 12, if let's say Madueke is there and he's actually taking some of the Saka minutes away, and I don't like that, I mean, there's always the opportunity now to move into something like Gakpo or even some other interesting picks, like maybe even another United midfielder. So I think directionally speaking, I feel a little bit more comfortable putting a little bit more money into the midfield and beefing it up in that sense. And going Saka allows me to do that. And, maybe Gyökeres will take the next penalty, and I think he probably will. But I think we know going forwards that if I was, let's say, to sort of make a bet in terms of how long I'm going to own these players, and I'm probably going to own them for quite a long time. I talked about transferring them out, but I think that's not my plan. Who do I think is going to take more penalties over the season? I think it's probably going to be Saka, but I'm happy to be wrong about that, as I said. With regards to, let's say, Dewsbury Hall and Semenyo, I mean, Semenyo, I don't think a lot of people even see the angle in terms of transferring him out. I think it's quite a short-sighted move in the sense that the only 2 bad Semenyo games are going to be game week 10 and 11, very similar to sort of how I talked about the Bournemouth picture overall. But yeah, I mean, I can't see myself transferring Semenyo anytime soon. I've heard discussion about how some people are considering it in terms of maybe going a little bit short term out of Semenyo, or maybe even if you're, let's say, on a wild card, for example, last week, maybe considering it. But yeah, I just think he's one of the best players in the game. not going to touch him. As far as Dewsbury Hall, I think he's almost come up as maybe, let's say, the best 5 million player in the game alongside a Longstaff at 4.9 million. When you look at the Leeds running games, I think it really dries up after West Ham at home, whereas actually I feel like I'm a little bit more encouraged by how good Everton have been, generally speaking, game to game, right? Sure, they've had some poor performances. They even lost to Leeds, for example, at the start of the season, but over the course of the games that I've seen so far, like even when you look at a pretty weakened team versus Man City that didn't have a Dewsbury Hall, that didn't have, sorry, it did have Dewsbury Hall, but didn't have Grealish, for example. I still think they played relatively well and they created enough chances. And a lot of those chances, of course, came from Njai, not Dewsbury Hall. He's not interesting from that sort of goal-scoring piece, but he still has set piece threat and still plays for at least within the kind of attacking positions where I think he still can get into certain chances and score like he did, I think, in Game Week 2 or 3. So I think the Dewsbury Hall is a decent sort of value play. And when I compare, of course, to some of the forwards, like a 5.5 million Calvert-Lewin, because of the existence of maybe a Krupi Jr. and you, I'm not sure if I really want to spend 5.5 million on Calvert-Lewin, whereas I feel quite comfortable just owning someone like Dewsbury Hall, because after Calvert-Lewin this week, who of course is much better than Dewsbury Hall because he's got West Ham at home and he's playing striker versus them, the big difference is that I think Dewsbury Hall just feels like a little bit more of a safer hold at a cheaper price, and his minutes are a touch more nailed than someone like Josh King, even though I have to say Josh King's minutes have actually been really, really good so far in terms of how much he's been able to hold up that starting position, and I think how much of a difference maker Marco Silva sees him to be. In the front line, though, I will be going Holland and Krupi Jr. So this for me is quite a simple play. I think that, yes, a lot of people are going to react to this and say, why would you dare bench Mateta? But I think you just have to almost play the fixtures as they are. I'm going to back double Arsenal defense. So, you know, if it's wrong, then so be it. I think Krupi Jr. just has a better game than Mateta. So I'd rather take those chances. And, you know, I can't overreact to, let's say, the hat-trick, because it's not like Mateta has been scoring endlessly this season. Of course, he's had a lot of chances, but still you have to sort of say a lot of the chances did fall specifically against one opponent, right? There have been games this season, like, for example, another tough game this season for example, that Chelsea match, right? Where he did have a good shot, I believe, with Adam Wharton slipping him in that Chelsea match, but that was the one shot that he had versus Chelsea away. So, you know, you have to give respect to Arsenal as a team. I'm not expecting a lot from Mateta here, and I'm happy to be wrong if that is the case. But yeah, I will be benching Mateta this week. So that's going to be the team selection. Let me know what your thoughts are in terms of, you know, benching Mateta, in terms of what I've done with my team. As I said, I am quite an aggressive manager. You guys know that I like chasing early transfer price rises, but I think the logic of chasing price rises so far is if it directly helps my team, I will always take a move that probably is considered an early transfer, and some FPL managers have the complete opposite point of view. Some people prefer having full information so that they kind of preclude themselves from the worst case scenario. I completely understand that I can throw myself into a situation where I put myself in a really bad spot, and I think that has happened to me previously in FPL, but that is still the way that I play in terms of chasing value from a team value perspective, whilst also trying to make the best sort of informed move, whilst also recognizing that, of course, midweek football can hurt me. One of the reasons why I'm comfortable doing this as well is because of the introduction of the free hit this season, right? The introduction of the free hit this season, at least in the first half of the season, means that you can almost use the free hit so far to cover up spots where you've, let's say, overused free transfers. So if, let's say, this week Colin actually got injured within his match versus Villarreal, or let's say Saka got injured versus Atletico Madrid, the reason why I felt quite comfortable actually making the free transfers early and ahead of schedule is because I still have that free hit in the pocket. And so because I had three transfers coming into this game week, if I use the free hit to sort of circumvent this game week, I don't feel so bad, because I don't think the alternative free hit weeks are actually that good. We've seen people use free hits so far. I think it's gone splendidly for certain people. It's gone absolutely horrible. Like, for example, if you guys remember game week 6 in that situation where a lot of people tripled up on City and just lost a lot of value from that free hit, with almost everyone else who was on the free hit sort of template blanking, and Semenyo doing extremely well, Senesi as well. So that's something I wanted to just mention in terms of why I'm comfortable making these sort of early transfer moves. It's I think part of it, from a strategy shift, I have the option of being able to be quite aggressive here. So that's why I've done that. I also think I'm almost a transfer ahead of everyone, and not everyone, sorry, but of course, I think Walterman's a fantastic forward, but in terms of being able to actually go for Mateta and owning Mateta, I think a lot of people will directly be moving a transfer towards Mateta in the future. So I think that my team in game week 10 probably is missing out Munoz compared to the field, but I'm not, let's say, underweight when it comes to owning Crystal Palace players. They're just going to simply be sitting on my bench this week, and I have 2 out of 3 who knows what my next transfer will be. So that's all I'm going to say for this week in terms of my Game Week 9 transfers and my team as it stands. As I said, Paqueta to Enzo is a transfer loading. But if, let's say, there's negative news on Enzo and his availability play, if I don't think Enzo's minutes are going to be good enough, I will probably roll the free transfer, which means that I'll have 2 free transfers next week. So let's just see what happens there. The reason why I think that's helpful is because I can actually save that free transfer, maybe actually instead of going for Enzo next week, if it still seems like he's relatively unfit, to actually go for Paqueta to Sarr in Game Week 10, and actually that will allow me to triple up on a team like Crystal Palace quite easily. So something that I've thought about. But that's it for this week. I think in terms of making decisions this week, one thing I wanted to point out as well is just sort of almost look at a player odds list that I've actually kind of created here as well. So this is the top 20 sort of player goal projections that I could see from some of these sort of betting odds that I've devigged. And yeah, I think the only thing that I'll probably mention about this week's in specific is, of course, this is, once again, as I said, a time to look at teams like, let's say, Arsenal, teams like Liverpool, especially since they appear extremely high up on this list. I think especially with the news that Isak might be injured, KTK actually looks like a pretty interesting transfer. I mean, if we're being honest, Gakpo's not on this list, but I think he's definitely in and around this. This is simply sorted by scorers, right? So the scorer odds for a midfielder are always going to be lower, but I mean, you always get more points for scoring a goal within a midfielder. So of course, you kind of have to weight the odds in that sense. What I will mention though is this is still, I think, a great week to look at certain players like maybe a Man United midfielder, so an Mbemo, a Bruno, for example. Waltermad appears extremely high up here, even though he's actually got a pretty tough game at Fulham at home. So that's actually really impressive. And then Krupi Jr. shows up really, really well here too. I haven't put Mark Gu up here, but I think he would be very, very close. I think that there's still a small risk that he might not even start that game. So I didn't really want to put him here. I wanted to put almost guaranteed starters that I can see myself starting. Sesko, I think, within the game versus Brighton, I think is someone that could obviously not start. So he's probably the one player that you can point out to that might not start. But that's going to be the sort of scorers list. I think when you use this and sort of translate this to thinking about captaincy, I mean, this week captaincy I think is interesting because some people are thinking about Semenyo, which makes sense because of course he has like a lot of different shares going on and free kicks. But I think Saka is interesting too. Just quickly looking at this list. Salah, I mean, the odds are way too high in my opinion. But I think the way to almost look at Salah is that maybe his baselines are quite good, but I think that the minutes right now look quite precarious for Salah right now in this Liverpool state. I think that given that they had recently lost a game within the Champions League and obviously still needed to get 3 points, to sort of keep their group position strong, I'm still shocked at how few Salah minutes we've seen. And I think maybe in the future we can see them be even fewer within, let's say, the Premier League, right? Where unfortunately, of course, Frimpong has come back into the side and then actually got actually got injured, unfortunately, within the game in the Champions League, which probably actually helps indirectly Salah's expected minutes. I think the way to look at Salah, if you're being pessimistic right now, is just appreciating that, of course, like the markets have almost like a historical preference towards Salah, and I think for a very good reason, but you're able to just sort of choose based on your beliefs, right? So even though on paper, I think this probably suggests that Salah's a better captain, I'm definitely just going to captain Haaland this week. Neither am I looking at, for example, a Salah move. That's kind of why I was comfortable making that sideways move towards Saka, because I don't think that there's anyone immediately going to who can immediately threaten sort of my team structure as it stands. I think I'm very happy with the team that I have. And with Isak being out, of course, Ekitike I think becomes much more interesting too. So it's just something to think about. But yeah, that's going to be the kind of odds this week. I think some interesting transfers there too. In terms of defensive transfers, I think if anyone's actually looking at that, as I said at the top of the video, Michael Keane's quite interesting for anyone who's looking for a 4.5 and actually just wants to bank on the next 3 games for Everton, which are really, really good, I think, from an expected clean sheets perspective, right? You're looking at a team like Tottenham and they're actually just look super flat from an attacking point of view. I think I've mentioned that they look really stale, and yeah, that's sort of my thoughts for this week. But I wish you guys the best of luck. If you guys have enjoyed the videos and the content so far this week, please feel free to subscribe. That really does help support the channel. Otherwise, best of luck for Game Week 9, and I'll see you guys soon. I'm actually going to be traveling soon, I think somewhere between Game Week 9 and probably 11. I will try to keep all the content here, but that's what I wanted to say, and safe travels.